Good morning, Lieutenant Colonel Pera. How you doing?
Hey, Sean, I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for having me on this morning.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining us. And I want to thank everybody in the audience for joining us as well for this webinar. I want to say good morning to you. This webinar is brought to you by Enercon Engineering, your power systems integration solutions expert. I'm your host, Sean Lott. I am the Director of Business Development for Enercon Engineering. Just so you and our audience knows, this is our 9th webinar in an entire webinar series. If you missed any of the past webinars, just go to our YouTube page or go to your YouTube channel and type in the search engine, Enercon Engineering, and you can see our YouTube page where you can see all the past webinars that we have done, as well as other informative information about Enercon throughout our past 45 plus years being in business. Before I introduce today's guest speaker, I just wanted to let you know this is more of an interview type of session, unlike previous webinars where it was more of a presentation. So it's more like an interview type of session. So feel free, if you have any questions, to drop them in the Q&A on Zoom, just by clicking the Q&A tab there. And my goal is to get to all the questions as time permits. I also want to let you know that for the record, this is a non-attributional session. And on that note, our guest today is Lieutenant Colonel Frank Pera. I'm so happy to have him here. He is the commander of the Army's 249th Prime Power Battalion. He has over 21 years of experience, and he has served in a multitude of assignments to include deploying to both Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, as well as numerous other federal and declared disaster areas around the globe in the continental United States. So, Lieutenant Colonel Pera, how are you doing this morning?
Hey, I'm doing great. Again, thanks again. Appreciate the opportunity to talk, especially getting out the industry, seeing what the questions are from the outside looking in.
Awesome. And just so you know, our audience is primarily made up of industry folks, as you alluded to. So I am a retired Army guy, so we know how we are with our acronyms and whatnot. So we'll try to break things down in terms in which you understand them and how it applies to you and how you can best help the Army and the Army's mission when it comes to all things power. So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you find yourself in the prime power field?
So like most engineers, we tend to be generalists in the Army, right? I started my Army career being commissioned out of West Point. From there, just a multitude of assignments, mostly in a lot of maneuver type formations, and that means kind of infantry, modernized infantry, such as our Stryker brigade. I've even spent time in special operations formations, as well as, in NATO. I was lucky enough as a company commander to be assigned to Prime Power, and in that capacity was able to stand up Charlie Company for the 249th Engineer Battalion. And that was a time, in the Army when we were both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we were, surging in our capability to support both theaters simultaneously. So we stood up a company in about 2008, and since then, that has kind of been, the framework which the 249th has operated in. I've been in command now for almost 2 years. Come July, we'll be transitioning out this summer, and just a phenomenal opportunity to command this battalion and also serve as the commandant of the U.S. Army Prime Power School.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So 2 years, huh? You enjoy the ride?
It went by fast. COVID was a curveball, but it is what it is.
Yeah, no, I certainly understand that, being a former battalion commander myself. That's awesome. Great accomplishment. So can you describe for the audience what exactly is Army Prime Power and what is your mission?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, for Prime Power in the Army, it's about really getting reliable power to the field. As we support our contingency mission, our partners, our mission partners and community partners, I'll say that first. But when we look at our mission partners and we look at the capabilities that the Army brings in a normal unit, almost every Army unit can sustain itself to some degree as far as power generation goes. Those tend to be lower tactical generators that they can use for a fixed amount of time, But as we look at sustaining that fight and going beyond, I would say the 6-month mark, right? That's where we have it, in our doctrine. Between the 6-month mark and the 10-year mark, you start to kind of really look for a more reliable power solution. And that's really where prime power comes in. In terms of specific, either output or voltages, medium voltage is really our specialty. So we kind of couch that in the Army as, output above 500 watts. And then, as far as voltage goes, anywhere between 600 volts to about 69,000 volts. So we are kind of right in the middle between, the tactical units, prime power, and then you really have utility grade power, stepping up from us. And that's where prime power fits in. And our job as a prime power battalion in the Army is to support both the warfighter in a contingency environment by being able to provide prime electrical power expertise. And I say that as expertise because we're not always just providing generation support. We're also providing, subject matter expertise related to safety, design, and a lot of other things. And then also for the community, I would say we have a CONUS-based mission, which is very unique just to this battalion. Unlike many TO&E or table of equipment units in the Army, we fall underneath the Corps of Engineers. And the Corps of Engineers has a mission to support, FEMA as part of Emergency Support Function 3. And in that capacity, this battalion supports temporary emergency power. So anytime there's a natural disaster that kicks off, there's more than likely some portion of our team that supports that effort. And I hope I answered your question with that.
Yeah, you sure did. So it sounds like your organization is almost like a 911 power solution when it comes to FEMA. So you have folks on call, kind of ready to go.
Absolutely.
For it, anywhere CONUS based. So how large is your battalion, and is it the only one in the Army?
It is the only one in the Army, right? We're, just under about 500 personnel in the battalion. When you look across the Department of Defense, it doesn't sound very much, but we are, we're probably about 5 times bigger than the Air Force, about 10 times bigger than the Navy. We operate on a slightly different model than both, where for prime power in our capacity, we have the ability to start an operation and see it all the way through to the end. A lot of the other services, whether they be the Navy or the Air Force, they've got very niche capabilities, but it's not supposed to be for an extended duration. A lot of their models tend to be, they stand up the capability, they create the capacity for the customer, and then they transition it off to maybe a commercial provider or a contractor. We have the ability to stay in the fight right up until the end.
Wow, so it sounds like you could be stretched pretty thin if you got multiple areas you got to respond to.
Absolutely, right? As far as scale goes, normally we provide theater support with one company, right? So if you think about all of Afghanistan operations, that entire theater would probably be supported with one company.
Wow, that's amazing. So what about the training that the soldiers go through? I have to imagine it's pretty extensive amount of training that they have to do before you push.
No, that's a great question, Sean. I mean, I think it's probably the most unique training environment that I've seen in the Army, and it's what really gives me an appreciation for being in this unit. Unlike most other parts of the Army, right, where you come in and, if you want to be a truck driver in the Army, you're going to come in and you're going to be trained on the family of vehicles that the Army has. So as long as the vehicles that you show up to at your unit are one of those vehicles, you will know how to drive it, how to operate it, how to maintain it. Our model is slightly different, right? We train them to be power experts. We're a little bit system agnostic, right? And this training path takes them across a 48-week period, right? So we almost spend an entire year with these individuals, and a good portion of that, almost 6 months of that, is just on academics. I mean, we hire PhDs from local institutions to come in and train these individuals on really math, physics, fluid mechanics, all of these different foundational theories that allow them to be able to kind of work through problems in a very kind of, I guess, like I said earlier, non-system specific way. Our selling point is that I can pretty much take a prime power soldier put him in any country, in front of any generator, regardless of the language, and he'll figure out a way for to make it work. We go through that training pipeline, and after we built that electrical theory, then we do a block of operator training with them that allows them to use the military generator capability that we have in the Army. And then after that, we finish it off with ASI, or advanced, individual skills, where they go and they learn a mechanical skill or an electrical skill or an instrumentation skill. There's no piece of equipment that I have in my formation, whether it be the generator unit, how we transform, how we distribute our power switching systems, every single piece of equipment. There is no one else in the Army that has the capability to tear these things down and get them back to service and standards, but my guys. So we do all the operations on them, but we do 100%, soup to nuts, all the maintenance on them as well. And I think it really creates a very robust individual as far as what he can do on the battlefield, providing a lot of that expertise, all the way from, like I said before, design to generating power.
Wow. So it sounds like you got some smart folks that are part of this effort. So how do you meet the recruiting requirement? Because you figure, it takes 48 weeks to train these folks, and I'm sure, you have some attrition in there, and I'm sure that's built into the acquisition model for personnel. So are you able to meet that? And then how do you retain folks?
Yeah, the timing of your question is actually, very unique, because we're actually looking at right now better ways to be able to pull individuals in to receive this training. All of our units where we have these power production specialists, or 12P is a military occupational specialty that they have. They all come in as a reclassification, right? So that means at one point they joined the Army as another skill. Once their tour was over, they said, I want to do something else, and then prime power becomes that second job for them. So what we're getting is a little bit more of an experienced individual. The youngest, the lowest rank in the formation is for the power production specialist is E5, right? So it's a little bit different from what we see in the rest of the formation. But it does create some hardships, right? You have to go out and you have to find the right individuals out in the field who have the capacity to be able to pass the course successfully, right? We have a hard time, when we start to look at what comes into the pipeline versus what comes out of the pipeline, graduating at a rate that allows us to meet the Army requirements on the end. And as a result, we have, consistently been well below the manning guidance that the Army is telling us that we have to maintain. So as a result of that, we're trying to change our model. We just received some approval to look at different options for probably looking out into society and how we recruit individuals. We'll verify, what skills we need in the force. We'll translate that into our recruiting community. And as they find individuals out in society, whether they be a high school graduate with a penchant for math, a college individual who maybe wants to do something different, but he's strong in the sciences, if they want to come in and do this job, it looks like we're going to create an opportunity for them to come in and assess and be able to be our first, junior enlisted 12P power production specialist. So we're getting there. It's not easy, and it takes an Army effort to be able to pull that off. But because of the emerging requirements, we really have no other way of being able to source the manpower requirements that we see on the horizon.
So is that something that could be, well, let me ask you this. So with that gap there, there's still a requirement that the Army needs to make. So how's that gap being filled today? Is that basically contractors?
Yeah. Well, it's, in some respects it is, because we know that there are certain systems that we can continue to operate under a contractor model. But as we go through modernization and we also go through kind of budget, realignment in order to meet those modernization goals, everyone's really working on like really paper thin margins. So what we're seeing is a lot of the organizations that were using contract support to be able to accomplish a lot of these power missions are now going away from those contractors and starting to look for military personnel to fill those positions. So we're seeing an increase in demand signal, even though our pipeline still remains somewhat fixed. So, I think those things happening with modernization happening, a new demand signal due to budget restraints all those things are increasing the signal for how many personnel we need as far as end strength for 12P power production specialists. And because of that, that's why we're trying to surge right now. So at the Prime Power School, you know, when I put on my commandant hat, what we've been doing for the last year is we've been surging. So we're actually on glide path right now to generate about 40% more power production specialists this year than we have in any previous year. And it really is a result of an active recruiting effort of us getting out to our Human Resources Command, out to our Career Counselor Network in each one of these individual units, and then really selling Prime Power as that next MOS for a lot of these reclassifying individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you guys do is so critical, because I was in the military for 24 and a half years, and I had no inkling about the Prime Power and what it entails and what you guys do for the Army, which is absolutely incredible. So with that comes you kind of take it for granted that you do have power until you lose it or you don't have it, or you're in this austere environment where it's like, you are really just roughing it out there, just trying to make things happen with little to no power, which becomes extremely difficult. I mean, you can imagine for the civilians folks out here, just imagine losing your power for weeks on end, like it's happened like in Texas and Louisiana, some of those other disaster areas. Survival becomes, survival of the fittest, so to speak. So how do you guys support? You have some real world examples on how you support the natural disasters that's happened here recently?
Oh, like I said, I think us being tied into the National Response Framework puts us on a short leash as far as, FEMA and a lot of other organizations requiring power. We've seen a lot of things recently with, demand signals for power. I mean, so I'll start with some of the recent ones, and I can go back to some of the more historical ones. But, right now, we know that FEMA and the Department of, Health and Human Services have a lot of things on their plates, whether it's, community vaccination centers, whether it's, support to unaccompanied children. We have been at each one of those locations across the United States providing, electrical support, really serving as a representative for the government, right, as we bring in contractors to install, facilities that require some sort of an electrical backbone. And we're the ones making sure that all those pieces are being done in a safe manner, because a lot of these locations find themselves on military installations, and we have to really do that to continue to protect installation commanders and the Department of Defense, and make sure that each one of these locations are safe to be occupied by women, children, and then for the use of vaccinations. But in addition to that, if you kind of look back at all the national disaster responses, right? Last year was the most active hurricane season in recorded history, right? We went well into, the Greek alphabet as far as how we started to name these storms. And we were a part of every single one of those responses, right? The most devastating last year was obviously Hurricane Laura and Delta in Louisiana, where we spent probably about 45 days on the ground. We're tied in at the state level with the, Emergency Operations Center, working hand in hand with the Department of Energy. As they work through line restoration, we work through point and restoration to be able to restore some sort of civil governance in those areas as they were going through. When you look all the way back, with all the major disasters, where it be, Hurricane Maria, Hurricane Katrina, even back to 9/11, where the 249 were the unit that was called to get up to Wall Street to turn Wall Street back on, right? So again, trying to restore that level of governance and normalcy to the nation. We've been part of all those efforts. And then when you look at what we've done overseas, right, we've been really in ARCENT, in really the Middle East since 2003 and have never left, right? As small as the battalion that we are, we've had a constant presence for the last 18 years. And right now, it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. Does that answer your question, Sean?
Yeah, it's just mind-boggling to me, because you stated early on the size of your organization, and then when you lay out all the mission sets and all the mission requirements, and when you try to troop the task, I mean, I'm not an engineer by trade, and I certainly haven't commanded the engineer school, so it's just it seems almost mission impossible, so to speak, in order to get all of these things done, yet you guys do it every single day. So my hat's off to you guys in that regard. So can you tell us a little bit more about your partnership with civilian industry? Like how do you,
So,
how does that partnership actually occur?
okay, no, I mean, I think that works great. I mean, so one of the biggest things with civilian industry that we always try to make sure that we have in the battalion is we have some sort of a link credential-wise between us and industry. So we use industry to help us benchmark, our technical skills and kind of what we put on the table as our resume for what we're able to accomplish. And I think what that does is, if we move to an industry standard, right, I think it helps us whenever we're dealing with our civilian counterparts for them to see our technicians as peers. Because, when you're on the outside looking into the military, there's always some sort of doubt as to kind of what level of training, what level of experience, these individuals bring to the table. The first thing we need to do is being able to kind of level the bubbles there. Our battalion, the 249th Engineer Battalion, is the only, military, National Electrical Testing Agency organization, right? So we are a military NETA organization, which allows us to credential our individuals to NETA level 1 through NETA level 4. And we do that so that when we go out there and we talk to industry partners, they understand, what at least that type of credential and what it entails as we go forward. And then when we work with, the civilian industry, a lot of it is really about building awareness to kind of the important link between us and them. And I say that because, when you look at disaster response in the United States, this small battalion is really a drop in the bucket compared to the demand signal that could come if there's a catastrophic event. The reliance on really civilian industry to be able to kind of hold up their end of the bargain and be able to shore up the seams in terms of energy resilience in those disaster situations is extremely important. So as we go out and we work with individuals like, Dominion Energy or Duke Energy, like those are the things that we really try to get after, is to look at how their response plan works, see how we can, leverage what they're doing with our own operations so it becomes a mutually beneficial situation where we're using all of our assets as efficiently as possible if we ever get into a disaster response. And then, really building that network of who to call and who to talk to as we go through this. Every single military installation that we have has got privatized utilities at this point. So everything that we do on that installation is done by, with, and through the utilities. And we've got to make sure that we have those relationships. One of the most, impressive ones that we've seen recently was, out in Hawaii at Schofield Barracks, where the Hawaii Electric Company actually built a 50 megawatt plant, on Schofield Barracks, a cooperation between the military, and a local utility that really allows us to do a lot of things in terms of how we prioritize, how that energy is distributed, in the event of a storm, to make sure that we can maintain a lot of critical command systems. But at the same time, it increases the partnership between us and a local utility so that we have an understanding of where one starts and one ends. So I think that's a good, kind of snapshot of kind of how we work with industry. One of our best things that we've done, probably last fall, was when we went down to the Dominion Energy Training Center and really just being able to kind of get hands-on with the type of equipment they use, the standards that they operate in, and then, that being slightly different from what we do, created, interesting problem sets for us, but that's reality. Those are things that I can't replicate myself at the battalion level, right. So we really count on industry to help us with that.
Wow. So so what you mentioned in Schofield, was that a proof of concept? Is that something that you guys are looking to replicate?
Yeah. No, that is actually up and running, right? So when you start to think about how, the military and local utilities can really help each other, that's like a perfect example, right? Because, with military leases and the lands that they have available, they can really streamline a lot of the land acquisition processes, and then, also the additional security requirements and maintenance requirements that a lot of these utilities have as they look at this infrastructure needed for, power generation. But what that does for the installation commander, though, is it allows him to enter into a conversation with the utility to also make sure that if the power does go off, because of this relationship, that he also has the ability to tap into that 50 megawatt generator if he needs to get his C2 systems on,
Right.
if he needs to get the hospital on, or if he needs to get, maybe his MP station or something else in there to be able to restore services to the community. So those cooperative relationships are really, I think, the future of how, everyone's going to leverage their own personal strength, to build resilience going forward.
Okay, wow. Now, does that also translate to a tactical setting from a training perspective? Like you got the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, Louisiana, down in Leesville, or at Fort Irwin in California at the National Training Center?
Yeah, we haven't seen it yet, right? We haven't seen it yet. And, the biggest thing is it's almost what you said, a little while ago, where you were in the Army for 24 years, and in those 24 years, you had no idea about the capacity or requirements of prime power. I mean, we are actively working an engagement plan where we educate senior leaders and their staff on how prime power works and operates, so that, because it tends to be a blind spot for many leaders, installation commanders throughout. So it's a iterative process for us to make sure that, staffs know what to offer the leaders know what to ask for, and that we see ourselves an extension of every one of those staff to be able to provide that expertise to show them how we can, make their installation run maybe a little bit more efficient, or we can provide some sort of electrical backbone to a lot of their, maneuver operations. We're not quite there yet. It's a process, but like I said, we've got a steady engagement plan on how we get there.
Yeah, when you talked about energy resiliency, it reminded me of a story when I was a observer controller at the Joint Readiness Training Center in the 1st Striker Brigade that came through out of, at the time was Fort Lewis, Washington. And, they came in with all their widgets and gadgets and toys, and their talk was fully automated. And the opposing force, the OPT-4, made their way in, and they actually cut their power. I mean, they literally just cut some of the cables, and it brought down their whole tactical operations center. And there was no way for them to revive it, and there was no way for them to revert to a legacy type of battle tracking for situational awareness and understanding without it. So it just kind of opened your eyes to how much and how vulnerable our power sources are. So can you just speak to how we're making our power grids, whether it be CONUS or in a tactical setting, more secure, if you could?
Yeah, so so Sean, I think the easiest way is, what we're seeing layers of resiliency, right? Before, when you talked about, what's your energy resilience, what's your backup power generator plan, it was exactly that. You have a building, it has an automatic or manual transfer switch. At one point you're receiving power from the grid, your power goes down, that transfer switch, kicks on, and then now you're receiving power from your generator, right? For many people, that was how we got after this. The reality of it is that it's not that simple, right? When you start to think about how you maintain that in an extended duration, especially as we look at, the threats the way that they exist today, we're no longer looking at this, insurgent threat. We're looking at peer competitors, right, that have capacity equal to, and in some areas, in excess of what we have in the United States. So, that's a sobering thought, especially when it comes to, critical infrastructure. So what we're starting to see a layered approach, right, to how we do that. So in addition to that standard commercial utility power that they have, that next level may be, a microgrid, right, where you have a suite of buildings, right, that are now connected to a smaller grid, with a smart system that links all of them and balances loads between the different buildings, right? But now it allows you to maintain a suite of capabilities, right, as you start to go down. And then beyond that microgrid, another, individual generator to be able to keep certain functions within those buildings on, right? So that if that next layer of power goes down, now you can at least maintain your critical functions, by facility going forward. And that's really the level that we're trying to do. One of the overarching things that, is applicable to each one of those is this idea that, it's not a fire and forget, right? Like energy resilience is something that has to be kind of nurtured over time. You've got to maintain it. You have to invest in it, right? So what we're trying to do is trying to get installations and leaders to understand that, they've got to exercise these systems. In the DoD right now, they've got a program where installations are being turned off without leaders even knowing for extended durations in order to test their energy resilience, right? And what it's supposed to do, it's supposed to drive change, right? Allow them to understand their gaps so that we can provide material, manning, and equipment solutions, right, for them to be able to build the resilience that they're going to need going forward. But it's one of those areas that a lot of people have accepted risk on, and we're now at this point, right, like I said, in this peer competition where I don't think anyone is willing to accept that level of risk anymore. So we're getting there.
Right. That's so important. Quite frankly, it saves lives, obviously, without it. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. We do have a question here from the audience as well. Want to know specifically, did your soldiers respond to the power outages in Texas that happened in February? And how did they aid in that restoration effort?
Right. So, during the Texas ice storms, what we see in different states, depending on which state you go to, are varying levels of response, right? So when you start to look at the states that tend to be in either a storm's path or historically have received, a significant amount of inclement weather, what we find is that those disaster response agencies are suited to support themselves. Texas, Florida, Georgia, right, the Carolinas, they're all getting there because they always tend to be in the path of that track, right, when it happens. The Texas ice storm was no different, right? So they were able to provide some of their own support. We did come in with a advisory team. At this point, the problem was Texas did not really request much support from the federal government, right? We came in there, with a team based out of Dallas, Fort Worth, and we provided survey support where we talked to the state and the county representatives. We identified kind of what their critical infrastructure was, and we helped them build their resiliency plan and gave them kind of a roadmap to get healthy on all that infrastructure, after they got out of that storm. But in direct response to it, Texas chose to kind of go alone and did not bring in very many FEMA agencies in response to their ice storm power outage. Over.
Okay. And in the same note, are you guys asked to do anything for partner nations like NATO or NATO partners or our brothers over in the GCC from a host nation perspective?
Yeah. So right now we've got a team that just finished up planning, and we're going to be going over to Romania this summer to build some power infrastructure to really support kind of the European Defense Initiative. It's really establishing a suite of capability as we kind of push from west to east in Europe, but we're doing it kind of one project at a time. And what we're doing is we're making sure that we, identify some of the shortfalls and some of the host nation infrastructure, and then we build in the capability that we know forces are going to need, right, as we kind of make that push to the east. So we're doing that right now. We do that by, with, and through U.S. Army Europe as they link into NATO. We also do it with some of our international partners. For the UK, there's a unit very similar to ours, a lot smaller, but it's the 528 Special Technical, Royal Engineers, STRE. They do very much the same work that we do. They also respond to disasters. They are their Army's, technical experts when it comes to power. We are working hand in hand with them because we really see this as a combined effort going forward. And right now, NATO, requirements are expanding. So, as we kind of define, what that power infrastructure shortfall looks like, we're just going to have to iterate on it over time. It's a very big and complex problem. We're going to have to divide it up amongst a number of partners, come to a very collaborative kind of working group to make sure that we all understand what standard we're trying to get everything to. But that is the future. We are doing some stuff this summer, and we expect ourselves to be doing some of that same work for at least the next decade.
Wow, that's interesting. So in your experience with medium voltage and I guess higher, what is the most common failures you see out in the field? Is it equipment related, or is it just environmental conditions? How best can industry support the Army when it comes to power initiatives to make sure that the equipment is as sustainable as it can be?
Yeah, so I think some of the failures that we've seen since I've been in command, Sean, have been, related to heat. Mostly a lot of the generators that we have out in, the Middle East right now that, we're starting to create some other sort of solution, whether it be sunshades or other things to be able to kind of reduce, how the ambient temperature affects the ability for the generators to be able to be sustained. The hard part about a lot of those is that the reach back, right, for parts and maintenance is all the way back to the state. So we tend to have to rely on a lot of local vendors, right, to be able to source parts or different things, and that becomes very complex and hard out in theater. As we look forward to kind of what the future of power generation is and what industry can probably do that can most impact that, it's really about kind of being on the front end of developing kind of those reliable generator sets that are simplified to the point where we can move to more of an operator and maintainer model, right? Very similar to how we use our tactical generators. Because right now, there's just not enough prime power guys to go around. A lot of the generations that we see in the military tend to be generators that were developed in stovepipes for very specific capabilities and systems. But what we're not seeing is a lot of interoperability between a lot of those systems. So the idea of a common power solution, that's really where the Army wants to go, looking at how we scale, right? Take, a number of these generators scale, allow us to create microgrids if we need to, reach those higher output requirements without adding in additional, medium voltage or high voltage risk, right? So, because what you're seeing is out in the field, you've got operators who just don't understand the inherent risk that our guys do when it comes to arc hazards or any of those other things. We've got to be able to kind of build systems that are user-friendly, that are safe for them to operate, that allows themselves to kind of shut down, have built-in fail-safe mechanisms to be able to protect the soldiers from themselves, right, especially in those austere environments. That's where we're kind of really looking for, a material solution to kind of help the Army move forward in the future.
Yeah, with the new administration too, that there's a lot of talk about the reducing the carbon footprint as well. So, is there anything that the Army is looking at from a power consumption perspective and fuel efficiency, where it's going to help with those carbon reduction initiatives?
Yeah, so I think that it depends on where you look, right? Because it's about kind of where the demand signals are coming from and what they're doing with those demand signals. So if you look at it from a systems approach, right, you have to understand that the Army is going through modernization. And with modernization comes capabilities, and the cross-cutting technology with all that capability tends to be power. So again, we're increasing, generator requirements, for each one of those systems that are going out. So because of modernization, we are increasing that kind of carbon footprint going forward. But when you look at the installations are getting smarter about how they employ power, right? We're starting to see the use of either efficient microgrids. We're starting to look at, large batteries as ways to kind of reduce kind of consumption. And all those different things. Like Fort Bragg, for instance, has been kind of identified as like this, defense center for energy because of, all the key organizations that they have there. And there's just been a lot of investment there to look at alternative ways to be able to kind of meet their power demand with a less reliance on kind of a lot of the utility infrastructure that comes in from some of the neighboring utilities. But so that's happening. But when you look at some of the outstations, so we have systems that are requiring more. We have installations that are getting smarter about it. And then when we start to look at our footprints across the globe, each one of those are actually reducing, right? So when we think about a lot of bases in like Africa, in the Middle East, in the far ends of Europe, all of them have been operating on a lot of these, generator supports for a number of years. Right now, what we're seeing is a lot of requests to get out there and tie almost all of those, organizations and sites into some sort of commercial utility power. It creates a lot more, efficiency. it reduces the carbon footprint, it increased the reliability. They'll still have a backup capability at each one of those locations, but that's kind of the three different paths that we see right now for power: getting smarter on the installation side, increasing on the modernization side, and then reducing as far as our outstation footprint goes.
Okay, so with that being said, I understand that the direction that you just articulated there, but the question that comes to mind is, what about things like EMP or hemp, those type of security measures or mitigation measures to prevent anything happening in that regard?
Yeah, so we're about to go through an iterative change for our main generators, our medium voltage generators in the Army. And one of the major changes for that generator fleet is that they're going to be EMP hardened, right? But the problem that we have is, it's a little bit of an acquisition problem, but it's almost a little bit of a priority and resourcing problem. Is you have to protect the entire suite of capability, right? Like, it's got to be the entire system, because if anything kind of in that system fails, then you are no longer producing reliable power, right? So right now, a lot of our near-term capabilities really do address some of our generation. We are working towards how do we complete and wrap around those sort of capabilities for all parts of that. And we know that the EMP is just one of the, of a number of threats that we're going to have going forward, but it's the easiest one for us to build passive defenses for. So we are working that hand in hand with the acquisition team, the program manager that works mobile electric power for us. And we have addressed really all of those issues. But you got to remember that we work on the medium voltage realm, and that's a very niche capability in the Army. We still have that huge tactical footprint that's all going to be completely vulnerable, right, to a lot of that EMP threat. And like you just said, Sean, that's where you're going to have those operation centers and all those other capabilities that trying to leverage technology to provide decisive advantage on the field of battle. But once we lose those electrons, then we're back to acetate, right? So we just have to be smart about kind of how we do this going forward. And I'll tell you that there's just a lot of competing priorities, right, as we try to be able to kind of win in competition, as part of our Army plan, by the middle of next decade.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to go back to acetate. That's I have PTSD from acetate.
Yeah.
So here's a good question here. So if you had to add one capability to your asset base, what would it be, you think?
I'd say that what I would like to be able to do, if you gave me one thing that I could ask for, it would be an extended planning capability, right? And something that can reach out into mission community partners worldwide and get ahead of the power problem. As when we get ahead of it, right, we get to really kind of address a lot of the harder issues, the logistic issues, the priority issues, the funding issues, right, the knowledge gaps. Like, we get to address all of that up front, at least identify the risk associated with each, and then build a plan to execute. When we're reactive, it tends to be very difficult, really, to provide, what we would, consider to be the best support to either the warfighter or the community member. So, because we have a very small organization, we tend to be on the reactive side because there's just so many requirements out there that by the time we get called in, something has gone wrong, right? So if I had one wish, it would be able to get ahead of that, right? Get to the left of the bang, if possible, by really integrating into the planning effort to identify those issues before they become issues.
Right. So do you participate in tabletop exercises? Because I think that would address some of those. Go ahead.
Yeah, we do, but it really is a process for us, right? We are constantly on a kind of traveling roadshow, right, where we're always engaging, either the Army Service Component Commands, which is the Army portion of either Army Europe or Army US or Army Indo-PACOM, right? And we get in there and we pretty much say, hey, look, have you guys thought about prime power? What do you guys think about this? And for us, it's really about kind of sending that message out there to kind of make sure that everyone understands that this capability exists in the Army, that we consider ourselves an extension of their planning staff, and I think working together, we can kind of forge the way ahead in providing the energy resilience and reliability that each of these units need to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the schoolhouse there, do you guys have power simulation to train on to use, like power
Yeah.
test device?
Yeah, so it's very interesting, right, with our schoolhouse, because our schoolhouse, when we take them through operators training, knowing that when they get out there into the real world, they could see just about everything. I mean,
Right.
we've got a suite of generators that date back to the 1950s, right, and they go through everything from like normal combustion to steam to turbine. They do all of it, right, so that they can get the best look on all the equipment. And then when we find a partner with something similar or something a little bit different, right, we definitely reach out for that. We've got a mission now overseas, and it was a very unique requirement. We were able to talk to the Kona-based contractor who built it and designed the system, and we're able to train on it here before we ever departed, so that by the time we got overseas, we understood how all the systems kind of work together. We ran through a maintenance routine at least once or twice prior to going down, and we identified some good POCs stateside in case we ran into issues. But those are just unique ways that we have to get after these problem sets, because you know as well as I do, Sean, that there's no monopoly on how power is used throughout. So there's a lot of players in this game, and all of them have a different way of getting after it. So we have to take it one problem at a time.
Right, right. Well, this is outstanding. I do want to thank you because we're coming up 10 minutes from closing. So I want to make sure that folks, if you have a question, be sure to drop it in, and we'll see if we can get it answered, because we do have a couple more minutes left here. But I do want to thank you for describing such a complex mission set to our audience in a way that they can understand it. And even I, 20 plus years in the service, learn a great deal of information about what you do and how critical the service that you provide, you and your team provides to this nation, to our warfighters around the globe, is just absolutely impressive. So I just want to thank you for sharing y'all's story with us here.
Oh, thanks a lot, Sean. I appreciate it. One thing you talked about, like our relationship with industry and what we can do. I would say, whatever we can do to kind of, acknowledge the experience and the training that these professionals have as they exit the Army becomes very important. These guys, they put a lifetime of service into the Army, and there are a number of opportunities external, but they stay committed, and they see it all the way through to retirement. And then when they transition out, being able to make sure that they have a soft landing on the way out is extremely important for us. So if we can do that by educating companies on kind of what capability this is and what these individuals can truly add to their, to their bottom line, I mean, we're all willing to kind of be in partnership on that. But that would probably be the last thing that I ask for.
Yeah, that's a very great point, because the conditioning that you guys have and you guys do is the same, right? It's equal. So these men and women that are in your organization are truly serving selflessly, because I mean, I don't want to get on a high chair, but it is one of my passions, is to ensure that folks that serve our country are able to transition smoothly when it's time for them to hang up their boots or to retire. And if you've been doing it for 20 plus years, it's not as easy as one might think, because it's a scary thought. When you're wearing a uniform, you're putting on boots day in and day out, and then now you're going to transition into this civilian world. It becomes, right. It's just a different mindset and a different shift, and that you have to partake in. And anything that industry could do, just to echo the Colonel's points here, to help with that, to provide that soft landing, would be a great stress relief for a lot of soldiers and airmen, and Marines out there. So yeah, I appreciate that note. So with that said, I want to thank you again for joining us and sharing so much time with us and explaining. what it is that you all do and how we can best benefit you. And if there are other questions that I get, I will be sure to email you. And I really want to stay in touch with y'all's organization. It was great meeting you and the team.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sean. Appreciate it. If you need anything from us, you know how to reach me.
Okay, thank you. All right, and for the audience, our next webinar is Load Sense, Load Demand with Steve Conrad. And if you don't remember Steve, he did one, maybe two webinars last year. So you can go to YouTube channel and check those out. And Steve is one of the most seasoned employees here at Enercon, and he is super excited to actually, he's going to do 2 or 3 webinars this year. So this is his first in the shoot for 2021. So the date on that is the 25th of May, right before the Memorial Day weekend, and it's at 10 o'clock Central Daylight Time. So again, thank you all for joining. Thank you for your questions. And if you missed any of it, go to our YouTube page and I will post it there shortly. You guys have a great week.